During our class videos, you may hear our poets and playwrights use terms that are new to you. We have created a list of key terms and definitions that you can refer to at any point during our video lectures. This list is available on the Videos and Readings class page, where you can read it or download it as a PDF. If you would like to find and review these terms while you watch each class video, you can stop this video, go back to the Videos and Readings class page, and download the PDF. There you can play this video and each of the following class videos. If you have any questions about these terms, we encourage you to ask your teaching team in the weekly class discussions. Kei Miller is a Jamaican essayist, poet, and novelist. He has written 10 books, including The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion, L'Authentique Perline Poreus, Writing Down the Vision, Essays, and Prophecies, and most recently, a novel titled Augusttown. He has been shortlisted for numerous prizes, including the Commonwealth Writers' First Book Prize, the Dylan Thomas Prize, and the John Llewellyn Rhys Prize. And he has won the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature and the 2014 Forward Prize for Poetry. He was a 2007 resident at the International Writing Program and has taught at York University, the University of Glasgow, and Royal Holloway University of London. He currently teaches English at the University of Exeter.
All right, so I'm Kei Miller. I'm a writer of all kinds of things, of fiction, of non-fiction, essays, and poetry. I'm a professor of creative writing in the UK at University of Exeter. But I think probably the genre that draws me the most is poetry. So I'll talk about poetry. I think my work is by nature political. But I don't know if I am drawn to a social issue or drawn to write about it. I think I'm drawn to language, and I think language is political. There's a great line by Walcott: "No language is neutral," and I think the very nature of thinking about the words that you use, thinking about who can hear those words and who can't hear those words. The minute you begin thinking like that, your work becomes steeped in politics. If you begin to shape those words based again on who might hear them and who might not hear them, or willing people to hear what you are saying in the way that you're saying it, the poem increasingly becomes a political act. And I think that's why I'm political. It's the language, it's the choice of language that I don't know, lights a fire underneath the poem. So I think my work becomes political because it is conscious of its language, and in that way, I think perhaps all poems are political in a way. So my last book of poems was a book called The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion. And I'll tell you the idea behind the poems, which I guess, is insanely political. So I was looking at some maps of early Jamaica, and perhaps the most interesting thing about a map is not what is on the map, but what's not on the map. So why didn't the cartographer see this village, or why didn't he see that road? Were the people who inhabited that village, or were the people who used that road too unimportant for him to see? And so how do you write a collection that shows what is not included on a map? So that's the whole idea of the poem. It imagines a cartographer coming to my own country, Jamaica, to map the roads, and he ends up in a very contentious conversation about maps and about map making. But the whole book is about language. I mean, map making in that sense is always a metaphor. And so the poem begins with a poem called Establishing the Meter, which is a very true thing that happened. So in kind of kind of during the end of the French Revolution, two French cartographers decide to do an amazing thing. They are going to map the world. They're going to measure the world. And from this measurement, so they're going to measure the circumference of the Earth, and I think the unit is 1/40 millionth or 1/400 millionth of that is going to be a new meter. Is going to be a new measurement, and it's going to be called the meter. And so the poem begins with this poem called "Establishing the Meter." Again, it's clearly a metaphor, and in that I'm thinking about who established the meter. And why did that meter become universal? How did this new way of measuring displace other local ways of measuring? And so the whole book is concerned with that, concerned with what is the, do we write poems always in iambic pentameter or in another meter? Was there a meter that was local that we don't write in anymore because a universal way of writing superseded that? And so the measurement of poetry, what we think as valid, that's always political. And so I don't know if that's a small example of language or the way that we measure poetry or speak poetry, that those things can become political very quickly. And of course, we're talking about political with a kind of common P, not necessarily about governments, but I guess when I talk about poetry being political, is that I'm concerned with ideas of power and who has power and who has been disempowered. So disempowered by language, not necessarily by government, disempowered by all kinds of processes. So it's a much broader idea of what politics are. So in this collection, in the Cartographer, there are a few poems, kind of a sequence within the sequence called Place Names. And it's always a place in Jamaica and I'm fascinated by the name. Here's the idea behind that sequence. If in a country like my own country, it's a history of colonialism, it's a history of enslavement, it's a history of people not being allowed to read or write. And so when you tell that story, how do you find that history? Yeah, when you tell that story, how do you find that history? And I realize that sometimes people hide their histories in strange places, and you have to be sensitive enough to listen to that and to find it there. And I found that place names were a place where history was often recorded. I'll tell you about one of the other poems, but I guess the place name poems come from a larger project and a larger idea that I have about what poetry does, because the place name poems look like definitions. So I've been fascinated by this for a long time. Poems that look like definitions, that look as if you've looked in a dictionary or an encyclopedia, and this is the entry that you find. And I guess at the heart of it, I think that good poetry always exposes the world as being insufficiently defined. It takes something and it says that definition that you had of it, this way of seeing it, it was always insufficient, and the poem therefore expands our way of knowing the world. And so from the beginning, I was writing poems that again looked like dictionary definitions, and there's some great poems like that. Robert Pinsky's Shirt, which just says, this object that you thought was so ordinary, let me fold in all kinds of histories and stories. Let me take you all over the world to tell you what is involved in the making of this shirt. And so these poems, these place name poems, they probably come. They're a part of that larger project, which is probably something I tell all my students. If you've come to the end of the poem and it does not expose the world or the thing that you're thinking of as being insufficient in the way that we saw it before, then probably you haven't come to the end of the poem yet. Probably you haven't done all that you can with the poem. Probably one of the more interesting poems that I wrote in that sequence was a poem called Place Name Oracabessa. And I'll tell you, read the poem in a second. But I was asked to write this poem for an exhibit at Buckingham Palace. So they had taken out all of their gold and they wanted a poem to celebrate the end of this exhibition. And probably it was a risky poem to read in that setting. But again, I wanted to go back to Jamaica and our own history with gold. And what stories are hidden in the naming of one place in Jamaica. So I'll read the poem, or I'll remember the poem. Place name, Oracabessa. Origins disputed, but most likely leave over from the Spanish, ora cabeza, golden head, though what gold was here, other than light glinting off the bay, other than bananas bursting out from red flowers, though this too is disputed, not the flowers, but the origin of bananas. They may have come here with Columbus on a ship which in 1502 slipped into Oracabessa the way grief sometimes slips into a room. In those days, the sailor tried to name the island Santa Maria, as if not knowing we already had a name in another language, a language whose speakers would soon all die, though this too is disputed, not the deaths, but the completeness of genocide. For consider, if you will, such leave-over words as hurricane, consider barbecue, consider Jamaica, land of wood and water, but not of gold. Could someone please go back in time and tell Columbus in Taino there are no words for gold? Christopher Columbus, in Italiano Cristoforo Colombo, in Espanol Cristobal Colon. A teacher once told me Colon is root word for colonist, and though I know that was false etymology, there is some truth to it. Oracabessa, at which place you might find such tranquil villas as Golden Ridge, Golden Cloud, Golden Eye, long-time home of Ian Fleming, who sat there on cliff's edge, the morning's breakfast brought to him by a woman named Doris, the scent of ackee and crisp fried breadfruit wafting up to his nostrils, while between his teeth he bit a No. 2 pencil, all the time looking out to sea as if fishing for a story, maybe a man. An incredible man, let's call him Bond. James Bond, who knew 007 wasn't actually Scottish, but a barefoot boy from St. Mary, Jamaica. Like so many others, he too migrated the brutish winter, cooling his complexion down to white. Such stories, Goldfinger, Golden Eye, the man with a golden gun. Did you never stop to wonder where all this gold came from? Did you never stop to ask what was found in El Dorado? Well, let me tell you, not a nugget, not an ounce of ore, but light gilding the bay, and perhaps bananas, and perhaps ackee, and such language as could summon wind to capsize Columbus's ships. And if that's not gold, then what is? Yeah. I think we have so much to offer to poetry. Again, especially if you bring an experience that is away from the center, if you come from a place that you have access to other sounds that we don't usually hear in poetry, if you have access to words and languages that we don't often hear, that you have so much to offer to how we write, to how poetry is written and how poetry is heard. But you can't do that with a kind of preciousness. I mean, you have to craft those sounds into being. You have to be careful with how those sounds are presented to the world. But I think I really think I'm lucky to have come from where I come from, to have access to those things. And so, I think a a course like this is tremendous to encourage people to bring those sounds into being and into life and into poetry. And I wish you all the best with your work doing that.
Won the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature and the 2014 Forward Prize for Poetry. He was a 2007 resident at the International Writing Program and has taught at York University, the University of Glasgow, and Royal Holloway University of London. He currently teaches English at the University of Zion, L'Authentique Perline Poreus, Writing Down the Vision, Essays and Prophecies, and most recently, a novel titled Augusttown. He has been shortlisted for numerous prizes, including the Commonwealth Writers' First Book Prize, the Dylan Thomas Prize, and the John Llewellyn Rhys Prize, and he is During our class videos, you may hear our poets and playwrights use terms that are new to you. We have created a list of key terms and definitions that you can refer to at any point during our video lectures. This list is available on the Videos and Readings class page, where you can read it or download it as a PDF. If you would like to find and review these terms while you watch each class video, you can stop this video, go back to the Videos and Readings class page, and download the PDF. There you can play this video and each of the following class videos. If you have any questions about these terms, we encourage you to ask your teaching team in the weekly class discussions. Kei Miller is a Jamaican essayist, poet, and novelist. He has written 10 books, including The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to